Okay, we seem to be live now. We are live on the YouTubes, bros. All right. So, hello everybody. My name is Ken Poirier. You like my vignette? I like my vignette. It shows it hides my dirty room. So you can tell by the fact that I have a dirty room that I am an independently published author, and not a traditionally published author. So let's get that off right off the bat. I have nothing against being traditionally published. I think it's great if you can pull it off. But I want to talk about why you might want to do one or the other, because every author on YouTube who has I don't this isn't an Authortube channel. It's my personal channel, but I try to do Authortube videos on the channel here, so feel free to check those out. I got a playlist on my channel page of my Authortube stuff if you want to check it out. So this is a book that I wrote. It's called Fake Tattoos. All right. And it is independently published. Now, I don't like the term self-publishing. I think I mean, yes, there is self-publishing, but I'm putting self-publishing into indie publishing. So regardless of whether you are only publishing your own books or if you're publishing with a non-traditional publisher, an independent publisher, it's all pretty much the same. I know a lot of different I like to call them publishing labels, which is a different, a publishing house is a traditional published book. They have a huge infrastructure. They've been around for a long time. Um, and these independent publishers are using the same systems that everybody else is, whether you go through Amazon or Lightning Press or whoever. It's all boils down to the same thing. If an indie publisher that publishes multiple authors is going to be viewed by the industry exactly the same as if you self-published, until they can make that leap into being a full-blown company like the traditional publishers are. There's a lot of fly-by-night indie publishers out there, so you got to be careful who you pick and who you go through. But there are advantages, disadvantages, etc., etc. So first thing I want to say is this idea. I don't like the idea of traditionally published versus independently published, and so I put that in my video just because that's what people say, and that's like the hook, and that's what people are searching for. But I think it's more of a question of when it comes to the philosophy behind publishing. There's the versus camp and there's the and camp. All right, and it might not make sense right away, but I'm in the and camp. Okay, so some people seem to think that you can either be traditionally published and go that route, or independently published and there's no crossover. I disagree with that. I don't see any reason why you can't do both, other than people are jerks. If you can't do both, that means somebody's being a jerk to you one way or another. Now, they say that if you are independently published, that agents won't want to pick you up because they don't have the rights to your independently published stuff, and they only want you going through a traditional publisher, and they want to be able to ensure the quality of your work, so on and so forth. That's a load of bull. If your agent is saying they don't want you because you have self-published or independently published books, you don't want that agent anyway, because they're not interested in representing your best interest. Okay, and it's, from what I can tell, from what I've read in interviews and articles written by agents, agents aren't going to want to publish every book you write anyway, right? So if they don't want to publish it, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to send it to another agent or independently publish it or whatever. Now, of course, if you can get an agent, this is great. This could be good for your career. If you can, I always say, try to traditionally publish first. Okay, if you can't traditionally publish, then go ahead and independently publish, whether that's self-publishing or independently publishing, or with an independent publisher or whatever. But if nobody wants to traditionally publish your book, what, you're just gonna bury it in your file cabinet for all of eternity? That's dumb. That's akin to censorship at the very least. Now, I did try to get this traditionally published first, and I realized it was really going to be uphill because of the subject matter of this book. So I went and researched all the agents out there. I picked the 25 that I thought were most likely going to be able to get behind and support this book. When they didn't want it, I said okay, and I went ahead and independently published it. It was never my intention to independently publish this book, but I did anyway. And in retrospect, I think that's a really good idea that I went ahead and did do the independent publishing. So part of the inspiration for this book was I read a couple books by Chuck Palahniuk. Okay, this is Choke, and as you can see, my book's really dirty because I'm not a bibliophile. Okay, I keep this on my desk, and a lot of times I use it as a coffee coaster. So it's dirty as hell. But you know what? This has got a laminate cover. I can just wipe this off with a sponge, and it's good as new. But I want to talk about this one. So I read Fight Club. Somebody handed me Fight Club and Choke and Diary, and they're like, dude, you got to read these. And so I did. And Fight Club was very good. It's different than the movie, so if you've only seen the movie, definitely read the book. Choke was good. I really enjoyed Choke. It's actually one of my very favorite books I've ever read, and it was part of what inspired me to write Fake Tattoos. Fake Tattoos. I did a lot of, after I read these books, I did a lot of researching into Chuck Palahniuk and his writing style and his career and his philosophies of writing and stuff. I'm going to read you the first paragraph, or two or three, I guess technically three, although two of the paragraphs are one sentence long. So really it's like one sentence, one paragraph. Okay, so chapter 1, and it starts off. Let's see if we can get the camera on this. Hello. It's autofocus, so it's tough. I don't know if you can see that, but it's the first line is in bold, and it's an impact font, which is a different font than the rest of the book. Okay, and it says, you ready? If you're going to read this, don't bother. That's line 1. Okay, now to regular font. After a couple of pages, you won't want to be here, so forget it. Go away. Get out while you're still in one piece. Next paragraph. Save yourself. Okay? And then it goes on. There has to be something better on television, or since you have so much time on your hands, maybe you could take a night course, become a doctor. You could make something of yourself. Treat yourself to a dinner out. Color your hair. You're not getting any younger. And that's the whole first page. Okay, it's very short. And it goes on for a whole chapter about, trying to convince the reader not to read the book, which is a great little reverse psychology tactic to hook the reader in. And so I thought that was great. Problem with it was it goes on and on about how these are terrible people and all this disgusting stuff is going to happen. And no doubt, I would not doubt in the slightest that in the first draft of this book, That's exactly what was in it. Now, the final version, the copy I have, after going through editors and marketing and all this other stuff, um, does not live up to that expectation. There's a little swearing in it, a little bit of sex and masturbation and some other stuff, but nothing serious. Definitely not Chuck Palahniuk's most hardcore writing by any chance. And a lot of, I mean, when you hear him talk about the things he writes as short stories and things like that, um, I mean, he's literally been kicked out of writing groups for being too vulgar. Um, and that's the stuff that I want to read. I know. It's a weirdo, right? But most people don't. Okay, and with traditional publishing, you have to understand that you're just not going to be able to do those things. You're going to have to write to the mainstream. You're going to have to kind of keep everything a little mediocre. You have to play, as they say, to the lowest common denominator. Okay, you're not going to want your book banned from Walmart. As great of a publicity as that would be, traditional publishers do not want your book banned from Walmart because that's where they're going to sell most of their books. Okay, which is why it's great we have stuff like Amazon and these other. Okay, Amazon's got its issues, but in a wider perspective of the world, um, it does have its issues, but um, it allows people a freedom of publishing they've never had before. I don't think, like, this book basically, this book is about a writer who's trying to write a book that everybody will love, and he fails in that. Well, he eventually does it, but at a cost of not being able to write the book you're reading, right? So that's the trade-off, right? He eventually does manage to write this book that becomes hugely popular. Everybody loves it. It's a huge success, but it's not the book you're reading, okay? The book you're reading is the book that he wants to write, but he can't because it'll never get published, okay? And so there's a lot of things in here. Because of that theme, there's a lot of things in here that would never, ever, ever get approved by the publishers. And it's really funny because, it's like you can go one way or the other in writing, right? With these traditionally published books. Okay, so like 50 Shades of Grey, right? You think 50 Shades of Grey, you're like, oh, 50, various degrees on whether that's erotic fiction or romance or whatever. It has a sordid past, but nonetheless, if you can do erotic fiction, right, and you can get that published, and it can become popular, okay, um, or you can do a nice mainstream, traditional story, genre fiction, whatever, and that can get published traditionally. But anything in between, it's like impossible. And this is kind of like an in-between book. It's like, yes, there are some very erotic moments, probably. I want to say, I think there's like 4 or 5 sex scenes in this book, and they're all pertinent. Every single one is pertinent to the story. And if they were to get cut, um, the story wouldn't work. Okay, if they were to get cut down, um, the book wouldn't have any bite. Okay, because there is a lot. There's a lot of. It's a horror novel. Let's just be clear about that from the beginning. It's not meant to be bubblegum. Okay, It is meant to shock, to scare, to make you like. I wanted the reader to not feel safe reading this. The never-ending story theory is what I call it. Other books are safe. This book is not safe. Um, and so I decided in the end to go indie publishing. Okay, but that doesn't mean that I will never traditionally publish. I keep writing books, and eventually one of them might get traditionally published. I think a lot of people who are in the independent only camp, they're people who just don't ever see themselves being traditionally published. They're either because they're not good enough and they don't want to admit it. They want to say, "Oh, the traditional publishing industry doesn't get me." Let me tell you something. The traditional publishing companies have been around for hundreds of years. They get a lot of things, okay? But the only thing they're interested in is stuff that's going to make a lot of money, okay? Huge amounts of money. Um, so I say write both kinds of stories. Write the stories that you want to write, like this one, okay? And then write stuff that's more on the traditional side. Like I have another, let me grab another book real quick. It's up on my shelf. All right, so here's another book I wrote. And this one's also independently published, okay? Love and Hamburgers. It's the Rick and Liz Saga, book one. Now, as you can see, it's not a very big book at all. It's a novella, okay? Selling novellas is very, very tough. If you happen to have a really, really good novella that's nice and mainstream and, critically acclaimed and all that, you can get it traditionally published. Big Fish is a good example of that. But you have to understand is that with you know Big Fish, it even though it's a novella, it says novel. They write novel on it, and you're like, this isn't a novel. There's no way that this is 50,000 words. Like, I'd be really surprised if it's over 40,000 words. It's a very short book, which are, hint, hint, novellas are really good for adapting to movies. If you want your book to get adapted to a movie, go with the novella format. I would like to see this eventually adapted into a movie once I have a couple more books in the series. Basically, and people who read this, they say it reads like a movie. And that's kind of how I wrote it. I kind of wrote it with the idea of it being a movie eventually in mind. Weird things happen in the publishing world, the writing world. Even though like 90% um, 90% of romance books are written by women. Okay, a little statistic for you. 90%. It's a rough statistic. I don't have the figures in front of me, but this is things that I read in online blogs and stuff. People in the industry. So 90% of romance novels, and this is a paranormal romance, 90% of romance novels are written by women, whereas 90% of the romance novels that are adapted into movies are written by men. Now, I don't think that's a sexism thing. I think it's just more has to do with the style. Romance novels written by women tend to be these first person novels with a female character, so on and so forth. Very female perspective kind of things. And with the way the industry is changing, these statistics might change. But the male romance writers, like what I write, are more bifocused, right? So you get the female perspective and the male perspective, and that of course translates into a movie better because you're getting female and male audience in to watch the movie. It's a date movie. You both the man and the woman can appreciate it on equal footing. Okay, well as the female perspective books are chick flicks, right? They'll label that's a chick flick, you know. Um, Whereas with the males, where they write for male and female, it's a date movie. Okay, so, um, but yeah, anyway, getting off subject. So, again, really hard to get novellas published, especially series novellas. A lot of times, what they'll do is if someone's got a novella series, they'll compress it into a single book and sell it that way. Because of what I'm doing with online readership and all that sort of stuff, and that I do the kind of chapter a week sort of thing. So that doesn't necessarily work out for me to wait until the whole series is together in 3 parts and pressed together into one book, which it eventually you'll be able to buy it that way with all the first trilogy together as a single book. But for right now, I just want to have these paperbacks out for people who enjoy the story and want to support it, and they can pick it up and they can buy it, and then eventually I'll take the first 3 books, compress it, and that'll be more of a novel. But in the meantime, I'm going with the independent publishing. Now, if someday a traditional publisher wants to pick it up and buy it, I don't have a problem with that. I don't. But right now, I'm independently publishing it. Um, the advantages of traditionally publishing. Okay, there's a huge advantage to traditionally publishing, and that is money. Money, yes. Writing stories is free. Anybody can write a story if you can get a pencil and a piece of paper together. You can write a story. But publishing stories is very expensive. It's incredibly expensive. Um, you have to pay editors. You have to pay layout managers. You have to pay marketing. You have to pay for books to um, be put into bookshelves. And you're like, what? You have to pay to be in the bookstore? Yes, you have to pay, or at least be willing to take a hit financially to get your book into the bookstores by offering them with a buyback or half off or something in order to get them into the bookshelves. It is very expensive to publish a book, and if you're trying to do all that work yourself or pay for all those things on top of writing without any kind of advance or anything, without any kind of income from your writing starting off, it's very difficult. I've seen a lot of people either um, give up or they put out books that are of inferior quality. And speaking of which, like, okay, this book here, Fake Tattoos, well, it's great. I think it's really, I love it. It's almost exactly what I want it to be, but it's not exactly what I want it to be, mainly because I can't afford to get an editor to, you know, edit the 300 pages of this. That would cost, we're looking, if I get a really low budget independent editor who I'm friends with, it's going to cost me $300. Okay, if I get a low end editor that is not who I'm not friends with, it's going to cost me close to $800-900. If I get one of the top professional editors out there, it could cost up to $4,000 to get a 300-page novel edited. Editing is extremely expensive. And while I did try to go over and edit this as many times as I could, I think I did something like 25 plus drafts of it going through. I miss stuff. Okay, I have dyslexia. Okay, I had it all my life. I have worked really hard to overcome it, but there's some things that I miss. I just don't see it. And I've come up with all sorts of great tricks and tactics to try and get as close to not screwing up as I can, which I could go over in another video. I'll go over another video of self-editing at some point here, because there are a lot of things that you can do to help yourself out. But there are some things I'm just never going to be able to see. I'm never going to be able to catch. And this first edition copy that's out there right now, there's mistakes in it. And that's not unheard of for, you know, a first edition independently published book. But, you know, that's kind of the trade-off, you know. I do need to get this edited professionally at some point, and when I do, I'll put out a second edition. I have a number of things that I've already fixed from the first edition, and I've got the story up on Wattpad right now. I'm trying to get people on Wattpad to look over it and help me out and find things. There's a lot of phonetic mistakes. That's one of the things that happens when you have dyslexia, is you can't differentiate phonetical mistakes, right? And so, you know, two words that sound the same but have completely different meanings. I think they're called homonyms, I think is the name of the word. But whatever, you know, I'm doing the best I can, right? And so, you know, hopefully I'll be able to make enough money and save up enough money that I will be able to get the book traditionally edited by a professional, and that'd be great. I'm very much looking forward to putting out the second edition of my book. But in the meantime, I'm gonna press forward. I'm gonna put out my books independently until I do have a manuscript that I finish up, and I have lots of them in the works. Some are a little more mainstream than others. I do tend to go a little on the crazy side with my books, but I think some of them they could be pulled back enough to go into traditional publishing at some point. This one, I don't want to pull it back. My hand's upside down. I don't want to pull this back. So for now, it's just going to stay independently published, and it's gonna be what it is. And when I have the money, I'll get it edited and so on and so forth. You got to just keep moving forward. That's my #1 advice to you. If you're out there, if you're writing, just keep going forward. Everybody makes mistakes. That's life. You don't expect yourself to be perfect all the time. You'll drive yourself crazy. But anyway, that's kind of my thing on the traditional versus independent. I hope that helps you. I hope that helps encourages you to keep writing. And thank you for tuning in. And I'll have some more Authortube stuff coming up. And yeah, cheers. Feel free to drop a comment if you're another author or whatever, and I will check out your YouTube page as well.